Lewis here with Status Coup. We are just outside of East Palestine, Ohio, just over the border in Darlington, Pennsylvania. We are on the ground for our fourth reporting trip here in East Palestine. If you want to continue to support our reporting on this, you can do that by going to statuscoup.com/join to make sure that residents in this area's voices are heard. With that being said, I am here now with Amanda. Again, we're right here in Darlington. This is our first time meeting, so first off, thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah, really appreciate it. Unfortunately, though, I'll say that in this, you and several others that you've been in touch with have been experiencing some of the more severe health concerns so far that we've kind of encountered. I guess, do you mind kind of taking us back to February, March, when this was more top of mind for folks outside of the area? Obviously, it's still top of mind for folks today, unfortunately. Here we are 6 months later. But what kind of health concerns started developing back then, and kind of what that has evolved into over the last couple months?
Okay, so February 3rd, when the train derailed, much like everybody else, we saw it on social media. We were home at the time, and my 18-year-old son came home, and he's like real into like accidents, fire things. He likes to follow the police department, fire department. So he actually went down to the fire because it was not blocked off or anything. So he went right down to Leaks gas station, which is right behind where the train accident happened. He spent about a half hour down there. When he came home, his eyes were just red, swollen, watering. He was choking. He already has asthma, so he was having a hard time breathing. He's like, "Mom, it's bad down there. I can't breathe, And I was like, well, you're definitely not going back down there.
Right.
We didn't really have symptoms the night of the derailment too much that we noticed. Just a little bit of the next day, because it was 9:30. So the next day we noticed that we were getting like irritated eyes, and then finding out through the weekend that there could possibly be chemicals on the train. So Monday I made a decision not to send my kids to school that day. They go to Blackhawk, and they were doing the chemical burn that day.
Yep.
And our school district actually let out early for the chemical burn, but my kids, I didn't send them. We made the decision to stay home that day. Figured we were 4.5 miles away, that we'd be safe. But we live kind of right past the intersection of 51 and 168. They had that blocked off with two big PennDOT trucks, cement barriers, or not cement barriers, but sawhorse barriers, in a state police truck. And we had gone to the store. We had asked if we could get back in. They had set all that up in like just the time we went to the store.
Right.
So he said, you can get through, but you're not on mandatory evacuation. But if you want to leave, now's the time to leave.
Gotcha.
So we came home, we stayed, and we, as many other people, saw the ominous black cloud coming up over the sky through our bay window in the front, and we all got sick. Nausea, headache, irritated eyes, and by the next day, you've had that choking feeling in your throat, the sore throat, and the burning nose, and that lasted for almost a whole month.
And to be clear, too, during that time frame, nobody, you had that one kind of instance where they were like, you're in nothing's mandatory to leave. They weren't necessarily even like recommending like, hey, You should get out of here. It was like, if you want to leave, you can leave, but like you're totally fine to go back to your home. No one was like raising any alarm bells at that point.
No,
None at
we
all.
were free to come home.
Right.
And those symptoms lasted, like I said, a good month and a half, 2 months, where you felt like you were choking. Took the kids to the pediatrician. I myself went to the doctor, all diagnosed with, chemical exposure, chemical burns to the nose and throat. And, after you keep repeatedly going back, luckily my doctor keeps noticing it as chemical exposure, but the kid's pediatrician just blew it off. Well, it's been too long. It's no longer chemical exposure. Right. But the kids continue to have headaches even to this day. Diarrhea, upset stomachs, especially around the times when they're digging up either the north tracks, the south tracks, heavily when they were digging up the chemical pits.
Right.
We were sick because you could smell the chemicals in the air.
Right. And to be clear, too, when these pits were being dug up and whatnot, residents in East Palestine, not everybody, but some residents in East Palestine, were kind of eligible for relocation and whatnot. But for the most part, from what I understand, nobody in Pennsylvania was up for that relocation. If there were any, it would be only a handful, maybe right on Taggart Street.
Right.
But despite the fact that we are downwind from all of that, this is where, in that area downwind of that is where, things would have likely been most affected.
Right.
And to hear, kids being sick, you being sick, anyone being sick from this, and not really having much warning is concerning, obviously, at best. But also negligent. I mean, these are... You've got the EPA here, who are supposed to be doing the right thing. At this point, I don't have much faith in the EPA after we've uncovered kind of lie after mistruth, after whatever you want to call them. But so those symptoms, happen initially. They happen during the kind of cleanup process. I guess how long did those sorts of things continue, and what happened next?
It's continued up until even recently. 6 months later, we still get headaches pretty frequently. My 8-year-old gets headaches. In the meantime, my son's asthma, who's 4, has been out of control. They had to add medications to kind of get his asthma under control because with the chemicals, he was getting real irritated with his lungs.
And to be clear too, sorry to interrupt, you mentioned stomach issues, diarrhea, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't common for all of you to be having stomach issues like that before.
No, never. And my 8-year-old was newly diagnosed with asthma in the midst of this, likely due to the chemical exposure, and was placed on medications and an inhaler. I never had asthma in my life, also was placed on an inhaler. I had 2 asthma attacks close to, in February, so never had that issue in my entire life. I'm 40 years old.
Right. Not normal to develop asthma at 40, I would imagine. Yeah.
Right, out of nowhere, just, have an asthma attack. And then seizure-like activity. So in May, it was May 20th. On the 17th, there was a heavy chemical smell in the air, very strong. The kids got headaches, upset stomachs. I had an upset stomach on the 18th. And then on May 20th, about 10 p.m. at night, I had severe muscle contractions and seizure-like activity and went to the ER. By ambulance and spent 2 days in the hospital, and the only thing that they really said was dehydration. They couldn't really come up with an explanation for why I was having those symptoms. My PCP, my oncologist, both said that the only lab that was out of place was that my kidney function was a little high, but being that I only have one kidney due to having kidney cancer, my kidney function is always a little high, so the fact that it was a little bit higher wasn't a cause to have this seizure-like activity. And leading up to that, I was having really bad muscle spasms in like my feet, in my hands, and contractions of my hand, where my hand would like draw out my body and like get real stiff. And found out that a lot of other residents in East Palestine, Darlington, were having these symptoms.
And just to be clear, prior to this, you had never experienced seizure-like, symptoms before at all, really?
No.
No.
And then just by posting on Facebook, people started contacting me and saying, hey, my son's had a seizure. Hey, I had a seizure. And it was all within the same 2 weeks of each other, and it was when they were digging up the chemical pits. So it was during a high exposure time, because again, the chemical pits were the most contaminated, so when they're digging those up, there was high exposure limits.
Yeah, and I mean, so to add some context to that, the last time I was here was in May. And on that trip, I noticed the smell pretty strongly one of the days that I was here. There was a lot more activity at the cleanup site, to the point where, like, I had a bad headache, I had a sore throat, and I was in town. I had to do a couple interviews, and I was in town, and I had one more to do, and I actually, like, put a respirator on for a little bit, because I was actually getting kind of nervous. It's just, like, your throat is not feeling good, you're feeling kind of, like, your neck is, like, tightening up almost, and my head was pounding, and it's just, like... it's hard to show that it's smelling on a case. You can't do that. That's unfortunately that does not exist. But I experienced it myself on kind of the two middle of my second and third trip quite a bit. I noticed that sort of thing, especially when it was warmer outside.
Yeah.
So during that time frame, it doesn't surprise me that that more folks were kind of getting these symptoms. So you mentioned other folks are reaching out to you now, saying they're experiencing these symptoms. Can you give us an idea of like how many folks were reaching out, and how, to your knowledge, like
Yes.
how widespread is this?
So for people that had new seizures, there was 8 people that had new seizures. No history of ever having a seizure before in their life.
So 8 people never had seizures before in their life, all experiencing them now.
Right. And then there was 5 people that had seizures but have had a history of seizures in the past, but they have been stable on their medications. And then seem to be having like back-to-back seizures, like and had to go to the hospital or see a medical professional because their seizures were just coming back-to-back, and again thinking it was possibly being triggered by the chemical pits being dug up.
Right. So they had been kind of managing that after they had seizures before, they were on medication, and it's not normal for them to be having them frequently.
Right.
So 8 people who had not had seizures before, are these folks in East Palestine and Darlington?
Yeah, mostly in East Palestine.
Okay.
6 of them from East Palestine, and then actually I didn't count myself, so 7 from East Palestine and 2 from Darlington.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So that's not 1 or 2. That's where we start to get to, 8 with who hadn't had it before, or 9 who hadn't had it before, and another 5 or so who had seizures before and having them flare up. And that's just who you've been in touch with.
Right.
We're obviously going to try to do some additional digging here to get in touch with more of these folks. But that should be raising alarm bells for folks. And unfortunately, at this point, I put out a story last week, the EPA kind of coming out and saying, like, oh no, like, all the indoor air testing we've done, like, we stand 100% behind it, even though they haven't shown that they found anything. Meanwhile, you've got independent testers finding things where the EPA is not. You've got members of the CDC who were here in March who got sick and left East Palestine because they were having so many symptoms, to the point where, like, the CNN, props to CNN for actually covering that. Unfortunately, not many people are out here covering this anymore. CNN published an article about this. It shouldn't take members of the CDC getting sick for it to more attention.
Right.
But it adds more validity to this for folks from the outside who are kind of, looking in, being like, is this real? Is this actually happening? It is real. It is actually happening.
Yeah.
And it's affecting hundreds of regular folks who don't know what to do. Meanwhile, the EPA presently for people in East Palestine is kind of signed on with this Norfolk Southern cleaning program that is having people move back into their homes in the next week or 2.
Yeah. I actually reached out to the EPA to report these, 13, 14 people that had seizures in that 2-week period. Talked to the EPA. They told me to call the health department. Called the health department. They told me to call the CDC. Called the CDC. They told me to call poison control. That's who is taking the symptoms for people. And then even then, when I talked to poison control, they didn't want to hear about anybody else. They just wanted my specific information. So it's like everybody's pushing the buck,
right?
Which is what we've been doing all along. The buck just gets passed down the line. Nobody wants to take your information. Nobody wants to deal with the issue at hand. They just want to pass the buck to somebody else.
Yeah, and that sounds consistent with almost every little thing throughout this entire story, unfortunately. Whether it be air testing, whether it be relocation, whether it be trying to get reimbursed, whether, all of these things. Everyone gets the runaround. You can't get a clear answer anywhere. And again, our government, who is kind of supposed to be able to come in and, like, clear that up, is kind of complicit with all of it at this point. I'm curious, have you had any success at all trying to reach out to either, state representatives, local representatives, senators, congresspeople? Have you tried to get it to that level at all, or?
I have reached out to several of our representatives. And I just had a meeting with, I'm going to blank on his name, Deluzia there.
Okay.
So on camera with his, I guess you would call it his assistant. And we felt like it was a pretty good meeting talking about what happened in Darlington. I was able to tell my story, being where I'm at, and he's going to take stuff back to talk to him. But we also talked about Shallow a little bit, being that that's Beaver County as well.
Right.
And then I had sent a letter to Representative Casey and let him know as well what we were dealing with. Still 6 months later, I had sent letters out to a bunch of them, and he's the only one that had actually gotten back to me. He had his assistant get back to me and said that they actually have someone in Beaver County, or that's very familiar with Beaver County, and can get in touch with me. She was on vacation, but should be getting in touch with me next week. Just to talk and see what the needs are in this area still, because they say that they aren't aware that there are needs still.
Right.
Or that there's been any problems in this area, being Darlington.
Yeah, which is wild. I mean, even I know this is kind of like splitting hairs here a little bit, because for folks who don't know, the derailment happened just really close to the state line. We're talking a couple hundred feet. If this happened a couple hundred feet further down the tracks, it would be the Darlington, Pennsylvania derailment, not the East Palestine derailment. Right. So this is two communities that are right next to each other, that people go back and forth between them every single day. Yeah. People who might live in Darlington might work in East Palestine, and vice versa. The two communities are very much intertwined, if you will. Yeah. So it was disheartening to see when Governor DeWine over in Ohio sent the request for a disaster declaration in East Palestine to the Biden administration. It said on there that there are presently no unmet needs.
Yeah, it was frustrating.
Yeah, which is obviously not true.
No.
Sure, are some needs being met? Yes. Norfolk Southern has. They're kind of getting away from it now, but they were reimbursing many residents in Ohio for hotel stays and whatnot. Some folks were not so lucky to be able to get that. They were reimbursing for some things. So yes, Norfolk Southern was meeting some needs, but there were plenty of other needs that were unmet.
Right.
I'm curious, despite that, because technically there needs to be unmet needs for the Biden administration to approve this. What are your thoughts on that letter, which was sent weeks ago at this point, gaining no traction at all, unfortunately? The Biden administration hasn't, approved it or anything, but not only that, they haven't even acknowledged it.
Yeah, that's extremely frustrating, because nobody around here has even gotten so much as a bottle of water. Everything we've gotten has been based off of communities surrounding us, donating to us from our air filters, our water filters, furnace filters, our water. All of that stuff has come in from donations, not even just from communities around us, but states around us.
Right.
No help from the government whatsoever. So it's frustrating to see that there's been no traction with the Biden administration. We clearly have unmet needs here. People's homes still need to be cleaned, and whether the EPA is even doing it properly is a concern for a lot of people.
Yeah.
For them to go back home, I fear that I've been a nurse for 20 years. A lot of that stuff in people's home likely needs to just be thrown away. I don't know how you deep clean a couch.
Right.
And get the chemicals that are in there out. Same with your bed, things of that nature. When these people say that their homes have been closed up for these 6 months, and you walk in and you just get hit with a chemical smell, you're not going to be able to clean those types of things, unfortunately.
And the EPA's current cleaning program, or Norfolk Southern's current cleaning program that's approved by the EPA, they're not talking about deep cleaning anything.
No, it's surface cleaning.
Yeah, surface cleaning. They're talking about dusting your walls, essentially vacuuming your rug for you. They're not going to move any furniture at all. Those concerns you just outlined, that I know a ton of other folks have those same concerns, are not being addressed at all.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
Yet they're using this cleaning program to essentially say, hey, we're cutting off the temporary relocation money. Go back home.
Right.
Here you go. Everything's, back to normal. Norfolk Southern made it right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not true. And we
Right.
have Scott Smith, the scientist that's come in and checked furnace filters, and that's where he's, finding that they test positive for the chemicals that were in the derailment.
Yep.
So are they going to do ductwork cleaning as well?
And that's so I asked the EPA directly about that, and the answer was, well, it's not going to be included in this cleaning, but if you want to have duct work done, hire someone to do it, and then submit your receipts to Norfolk Southern. And it's like, okay, are they actually going to reimburse for that? Because a lot of folks I've spoken with have been put through the ringer trying to go to Norfolk Southern for reimbursements, and some people will get it and some people won't.
Right.
And you might not get it one day, but if you go in the next day and cry over it, then maybe they'll, and that's terrible.
And you're begging.
Yeah.
So those people are begging. And here in Darlington, we can't even get the EPA to set foot on your property. I couldn't get anyone to test my well water. A lot of us out here, it's a rural area, so a lot of us have well water. We tested our water about 2 weeks after the train derailment, so of course nothing's going to be in there then.
Right.
But we're 6 months out. I'd like to get it tested again. I don't have faith in the EPA to come test my water.
Right.
I'd like it independently tested, but we paid $350 to
Right.
get our well water tested. That's out of pocket. That's not getting reimbursed for in Pennsylvania. I'd like my soil tested. I have animals. I have chickens, ducks, a turkey, Tom the turkey. And we have dogs that roam our land freely. We have 7 acres all around here and down to the woods. They go to the creek down there. I'd like to know if my land's safe.
Yeah. And that's the scary thing too, is in speaking with experts on the water and that sort of thing, like you said, 2 weeks out, your drinking water is very likely not going to be contaminated. Right. But when, here in Darlington, this is where when you look at the plume maps, as you mentioned, Darlington had the most out of anywhere, basically, as far as sediment coming down in the toxic plume when they blew up 5 cars of vinyl chloride. This is where a lot of that air went. A lot of that big plume of smoke that you've all seen at this point went right over Darlington. Yeah. When that stuff settles on the ground, and then it rains like it is today, it takes time for it to seep down, and in some cases, it can make it to the groundwater. So your water is as safe as it, is safe on the day that test is taken. But like you're saying, every couple months, every couple weeks, even maybe, it might be the case where you need to be worried about it, and it's not a problem until it is.
Yeah.
And then when it's a problem, it's a big problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. And to your point, that should be no questions asked, free of charge right now, 100%.
Right.
We're talking about drinking water in America.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that it's not being taken as seriously as we see in cases like Flint, Michigan, as we see in cases like Jackson, Mississippi. But those shouldn't be happening either.
Yeah.
And this should be taken as seriously or more seriously in a lot of cases, and it's not. It's
We should be able to independently test with who we want and not be stuck with the EPA, because we don't trust their data at this point.
Right.
We don't trust them to test for the right chemicals. When I had mine tested, they tested for VOCs, vinyl chloride specifically. So I don't trust the EPA to, test my water and test for the right chemicals. And as far as like medical stuff, even the physicians, I don't feel like are fully educated on these chemicals and how long they actually do stay in your body. We've learned that several of these chemicals have a half-life of like 1,000 days or something like that. So we know that they do stay in your body for that long. I now have a swollen lymph node in my neck that's been growing since July. I do have stage 4 cancer, but it's getting biopsied tomorrow. There is that fear, these chemicals can cause lymphoma and other cancers. It's been a fear since July. Wonder if it's something else,
right?
And not, the cancer that I already have. Like, is it going to be something else? We're 6 months out. Could it be turning into something else, or am I, it's
Right.
a fear.
Right. No, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of mistrust with the EPA? And I mean, I have an idea, but I'm curious, how that mistrust has kind of grown over time amongst you or just residents in the area in general.
Yeah, it's just that they say one thing, do another. Mm-hmm. It's constant all the time, They tell you one thing, then you find out something else. Even these newsletters that they put out that they're telling you what they're doing that specific week. Like when we found out that all these people were having these seizures, those newsletters didn't tell you that they were digging up the chemical pits during that time, but they were, because we called and we found that out.
Right.
And then other times, like when we call and ask, where are you working? And they tell you, well, we're digging up. It says that this work is complete on those newsletters, but you call and talk to an EPA person and they say, well, we're digging up the ditches around. Right. So, yeah, you may have the north or south track complete, but you're still digging up the trenches around. So you're still digging in the dirt, digging up where those chemicals are spilled. It's the same thing as working on those tracks.
Right.
So you can't say that it's complete when you're still digging.
Right. Not to mention, I mean, the thing that bothers me in the very beginning of all of this, you've got 3 days after the detonation of the vinyl chloride cars, and they say everything's fine. Everything's fine. That's what the EPA essentially gave everybody the green light. Like, yep, you and your family and your kids, your pets can go home. It's
without
fine.
Testing.
Yeah, it's fine. And and the testing that they did at the time, which they somehow still stand behind today, the little residential air testing that folks in East Palestine got with the little photoionization detectors, which I've explained dozens of times why they're not sufficient, but the short version is they can't pick up several of the chemicals of concern until they're at levels that are much higher than they should be. They basically gave folks the green light instead of, and they should have known better, and I believe that they probably did know better. They should have known better, and instead of saying, hey, like, with these just kind of like initial tests that we're doing, we're not seeing anything, but the reality is we don't 100% know that it is fully safe to return. So, we're not going to tell you have to stay out, but return at your own risk. If you're concerned and you want better testing done, wait a little bit and we will make that happen. Obviously, that's fairyland. That didn't happen now.
Never happened.
But imagine if that was the case in the beginning, saying, hey, our initial tests, we're not finding anything, but these are kind of the quick tests. We're not going to, we don't know what could be out there. Imagine the level of trust that they could have in this community and how differently this whole thing could have gone.
Yeah.
It drives me a little crazy. But
yeah. But even with the EPA meetings, where they talk about, the chemicals and, just what they can do. And then with the cricks even, saying the cricks are clean or the fish kill wasn't caused by these chemicals. And we know that the cricks are not even clean today.
No.
There's still a sheen to the water.
I was out there actually this afternoon with Christina Seisloff, and I mean, when you flip over some of the bigger rocks, you've still got a freaking rainbow in the creek. That's not normal, obviously.
No.
Yeah.
And how can you say that the fish kill was unrelated to the train derailment?
Right.
It's just insane the things that they come up with and put out into, like, the community. They print it in the newspapers, they put it on social media. And that's why these governors that aren't in the state, that's where they get their information from.
Right.
That's why they're misled. They're getting their information from the EPA.
Right.
From the local news.
Right.
And it's not factual. They're not here, boots on the ground, experiencing what we're experiencing, seeing what we're seeing.
Right.
They're getting their information from the EPA that are working for Norfolk Southern. Let's not get it twisted.
Yeah.
They work for Norfolk Southern. And Norfolk Southern is certainly not making it right.
Right.
They've thrown a bunch of money on the fire, but they haven't done anything. They've put on parades and carnivals, and they haven't even bought in a case of water for people. I mean, seriously, we're still drinking bottled water 6 months later.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. If there's anything else you want to talk about, we can do that, but it's up to you. Otherwise, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming over to my house.
Yeah.
Chatting with us.
Yeah. And let's stay in touch for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.